and welcome to the Abundant Self Podcast, a podcast where we talk about everything there is to learn and to know about what it truly means to have life and life in abundance. My name is Sharon Chabai, and thank you so much for tuning in. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whatever time it is that you're tuning in to today's episode. I hope you are well and staying safe wherever it is that you are. If this is your very first time here, my good name is Sharon Chabai, and welcome to the Abundant Self Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in yet again. I hope you have had a lovely week. I hope you've had a lovely month of October. Currently, as I'm recording this, it is November, so I hope that your month has started out well, and I hope you're expecting good and abundant things during this month, even as we come to the end of the year. So yes, thank you for being here. Thank you for choosing to tune in yet again. So as you may have noticed, this is a bonus episode. And what that means is that this episode is going to be shorter, and it's just not going to be as long or as, detailed or deep, if I might add, as our usual episodes. And the reason for that is that we are going to be taking a quick, short commercial break here on the podcast. We are going to be away for the next 2-3 weeks, so I thought that it would just be important for me to just come on and just let you know what has been happening around the podcast, what we have been talking about, and some of the conversations that we can look forward to even as the year draws to a close. So as you already know, the reason, or rather the purpose of this podcast has been to talk about abundance. And when I started this podcast, what was going on in my mind at the time is I was asking myself questions like, what does it mean to have life and life in abundance? And this is something that is in the Bible in John 10:10, where God is telling us that He came that we may have life and life in abundance. And for a long time, I had really been thinking about it. What does it really mean to have life in abundance? What do we mean when we say, we are living life to the fullest, or you only live once? Sometimes we just say all these catchy phrases just because they are catchy, but we don't really take the time to really understand what they really mean. And I realized that there were so many other questions about life that I was asking myself that I knew other people were asking themselves too. And if you already follow me on the blog that is on Chabai by Spen, you'll notice that we have also, or rather I have also been telling the stories of men and women who are doing great things, who are actually pursuing their purposes, who are living a meaningful lives, So I thought, so what are some of the things that are hindering us from living a life of abundance? What are some of the things that are hindering us from, living the life that God has actually called us to live? And that is why I decided to start the Abundant Self podcast. And so far throughout the 7 episodes that we have had, we have just been having these conversations and asking ourselves these questions, that really bug us about life. And of course, I remember when I was starting this podcast, I said, I may not have all the answers to these questions. I actually may not even have any answers at all, right? But it's just important to know that we are walking this journey together of trying to figure life out. Because I know for me, something that I really want to do when it's all said and done is just know that I lived a meaningful life, that I did not waste any time, that I did not just live a life of survival, because that is what life has been reduced to today. Life has just been reduced to eating, sleeping, paying bills, and dying, But there's so much more to life. There is so much more that life has to offer. There's so much more that we can offer the world if we are only keen to find out what that is. Why did God put us on this planet? Why am I here? Why was I created? What exactly do I have to offer the world? And once we find that answer, once we know exactly what that is, only then can we really live a meaningful life, a life of abundance, life in full. So we are going to be taking a short break for the next few weeks. When I started this journey, I think, of course, it has been a journey of also getting to understand myself, to also get to understand life, even as I share it with you. And I just decided, okay, it's time for me to also take a short break to just rejuvenate and to just map out exactly what I want for this podcast, the vision that is ahead of me, the vision that I have, what I need to do to be ready for what God is calling me to do in this podcast. And because of that, I have decided to just take 3 weeks. And that means actually it's not going to be a long break, because once this episode goes out, it's just going to come out exactly 2 weeks as it would have for any other usual episode, because remember, this is a bi-weekly podcast. So I just didn't want to leave you guys hanging. I wanted you to know what is going on. So yes, we're going to be taking a short break, but like I said, we will be back on the 23rd of November. We will be back on the 23rd of November, and we are going to be talking about something interesting. I don't want to mention it yet, but it's something that I have really been thinking about. I really need to prepare for it and even pray through it, so that even as I come and talk to you about it, I know it is going to be impactful. It is going to be edifying to you as a whole. Yes? So what is new with the podcast? So as you already know, the Abundant Self podcast is available on Spotify. We are available on Google Podcasts, and we are available on Pocket Casts. A number of my listeners have also been reaching out to me and letting me know that they appreciate it if we were on Castbox. So I decided to just go and look into it, and actually found out that we are on Castbox. So most of the time, I think the RSS feed is also being picked up by other listening platforms. So we are now officially also available on Amazon Music and Audible. We are also available on Castbox and on Stitcher. So you can now listen to the Abundant Self podcast on Spotify. You can listen to us on Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, and now you can also listen to us on Amazon Music and Audible, Castbox, and on Stitcher. So be sure to support us by following and subscribing to the podcast from wherever it is you get your podcast. And of course, we are working to ensure that the podcast is available on all major listening platforms, because at the end of the day, we want to ensure that this message of abundance is being heard and is being felt by as many people as possible. So you can also subscribe to a newsletter, by the way, so that we can also stay in touch throughout the month. Since it is a bi-weekly podcast, there's that sense of feel that the only time you can get to listen from, or the only time you can get to enrich yourself from the Abundant Self, is only when an episode comes out. But I don't want it to be like that. I want us to be enriching and just talking about life together, throughout the month, throughout the weeks. It doesn't matter if an episode has gone up or not. And the way that you can do this is by subscribing to a newsletter. You can do that by visiting our website. I have left a link to that in the show notes. And another way you can also engage with us is on our social media. We are on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. So on Facebook, we are The Abundant Self. On Twitter, The Abundant Self Podcast. And of course, on Instagram at The Abundant Self _podcast. Once again, the link to all our social media is in our show notes. Yeah, so of course, as I mentioned, this is simply a bonus episode, meaning that you can always go back right now that we're taking a break. You can go back and just listen to the previous episodes that we've had. We now currently have 7 episodes that have gone live. So you can go and just catch up with the conversations that we have been having, engage with us on social media. And just before we come back again with episode 8 on the 23rd of November, be sure to, have caught up with the episodes and even share the episodes. And as well, reach out to me. I may not be able to respond immediately because I will be like I said, I'm taking a short break, but when I come back, I will of course respond and, just have that conversation with you. What do you think? Whether it's the episode on authenticity, whether it's the episode on being mentally attractive, whatever episode it is, be sure to share it with your friends, engage with it, and let me know what you think. Now that we've been talking about the previous episodes, or rather the episodes that we currently have live, allow me to just give a quick recap of what we talked about in episode 7, where we were talking about authenticity. Now, the main question we were asking was, is there really a difference? What is the difference, rather, between fake and real authenticity? So the main idea of the episode was just having a conversation around what does it really mean to pursue true authenticity? Is it possible for someone to pretend to be real and still be real? And how does that work? We were asking questions like, is it really realistic to say that I am a different person in my personal life and a different person in my public life? Such like questions. And I remember just when I was talking about that episode, I was talking about how when we become so used to living in a world where the message of fake it till you make it is being propagated, sometimes it can become so hard for us to really uncover who we truly are, to really live and embrace our true identities, embrace the good things, embrace the bad things, all the in-betweens, just embrace who we are and not try so hard to fit in, to be loved, to be appreciated, to get certain social favors from our societies and whatnot, just because all in the name of our authenticity. So those are some of the that is actually the conversation that we were having of what does a real authenticity mean, because authenticity is something that is always being talked about. We're always being told you need to be authentic. You need to pursue authentic relationships. You need to go for authentic brands, whatever that is. But what does it really mean to actively be authentic, intentionally be authentic? And this past month, I actually came across a Bible verse during my quiet time. And it really spoke to the message on authenticity. I remember I was reading it and I was like, this is exactly what we have been talking about when it comes to authenticity, where we talk about how we can be so used to our putting on a fake identity or embracing, our false identity, that we forget that there is actually the person that God has called us to be, that is the Chabai that God wants me to be. But when I become so used to being fake, when I become so used to pretending to be real, to be authentic, there is no room for me to actually pursue true authenticity. So allow me to read the verse for you. It comes from Colossians 3 verses 9, and it says, "Do not lie to each other, since you have taken off your old self with its practices, and you have put on the new self, which is being renewed in the knowledge and in the image of its creator." Do not lie to each other, since you have taken off your old self with its practices, and you have put on the new self, which is being renewed in the knowledge and in the image of its creator. I remember in the previous episode I had mentioned how the true definition of authenticity is being the person God created you to be. We might try so hard to come up with fancy definitions or fancy ideas on what authenticity is, but when we get down to business, when we get down to the real thing, authenticity, the true definition of authenticity, is being the person God created you to be and not trying to be something else, not trying to be someone else, because you can't. When you try to become someone else, you'll become frustrated, your efforts will become wasted. But why not just become the person God created you to be? That is the definition of true authenticity. Now, when we look at this, when it talks about how we are putting on the new self, which is being renewed in the knowledge and in the image of its creator, I was thinking about how it is important for us to just discover. We need to discover what that means for each of us. What does it mean for you to embrace your new self, the new identity that is found in, that is renewed in the knowledge and in the image of its creator? What does that mean for you? What does it mean for us to just seek to leave behind our old selves, our old practices, the things we used to do before? If we used to pretend that we are real, if we used to pretend that we have it all figured out together, what would it mean for us to put all that behind and embrace a new and renewed identity that reflects the image of our Creator? What would that mean? And something I know that has been happening for me is that over the past few months, I have really been asking God, who do you say that I am? Who does God say that I am? Because I may try to say that I am a journalist, I am a digital media creative, I am this, I am that. There's so much that I tie to my identity, But who does God say I am? That is a question that I have been asking God and asking myself. Who does God say that I am? And how does that tie to the person that I am today? Once I discover who God says I am, and I just look at my life, am I representing who God created me to be? Once we understand who God has created us to be, once we understand what God expects of us, the person that God has called you to be, God expects you to express that person fully. And that is the only way that we can have life and have it in abundance. Because when we represent the person that God has called us to be, then it means we are not deceiving the world, we're not deceiving ourselves, but we're able to express our truest, most authentic selves to the world without fear of judgment, without fear of rejection, without fear of anything, and we're able to enjoy life to the fullest. Because at the end of it all, it doesn't matter it doesn't matter the opinion. There's this thing that says, living for the audience of one, living for God. It doesn't matter what people say or think about you. It doesn't matter how the world sees you, or what the world says is good, or what the world says is ideal or right. What matters is what God says. And that is the only way that we can have life and have it in abundance. So if you haven't listened to episode 7 yet, not to worry, you can always go back and tune in. And of course, feel free to let me know what your thoughts are on the same. Well, that is it for today, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. And remember, we are going to be taking a short break here on the podcast, but we will be back on the 23rd of November with episode 8, where we will be tackling more edifying conversations. And I cannot wait to see and hear you then. In the meantime, like I said, feel free to go back and listen to our previous episode. And I also want to invite you to check out the other podcast where I co-host with a very good friend of mine. That is the AYLF podcast. As I mentioned, I think in the very first episode of this podcast, AYLF has been a movement of friends that I have been part on for, I think, the last 7 or 6 years now. And basically we work with student leaders in universities all around Africa, that is in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, Rwanda, Cote d'Ivoire, and South Sudan, if I'm not wrong. So the work that we do is just our main vision is to have a transformed leadership culture here in Africa. So on that podcast, we basically talk about who we are as AYLF, the work that we do in our campuses, in our universities. Of course, here in Kenya, for the AYLF movement in Kenya, we talk about the conversations that we have in our universities, the work that we do, the programs that we offer for our young leaders. And I believe that it would also be a great opportunity for you to just get to understand what we are all about, and even see whether or not you want to join us and become of this family of friends, this movement of family of friends. You can check out that podcast on Spotify and on Google Podcasts. As always, be sure to let me know what you think, whether or not you want to be part of this beautiful family. Yes, so that is it, guys. Stay safe. Looking forward to seeing you in the next one. Until next time, bye-bye. There you have it. This has been the Abundant Self podcast with me, Sharon Chabai. If this episode has been helpful to you, feel free to share it with your friends and family. We'd also love to hear from you. If you have any feedback or questions relating to today's episode, then go ahead and leave us a voice message on the hotline number in the show notes. Feel free to also rate and review us from wherever you get your podcasts. If you remember nothing else from today's episode, I hope you remember that you have been called to have life and life in abundance, and that I am rooting for you always.